All right, today I wanted to show you a little trick that I've been using. I don't know if everyone does it this way, but it's been something that's been really helpful for me whenever I'm using fuzzes. Now, traditionally, most fuzzes don't work that well with a buffer before or after. There's changes on both. Radical change up front with a buffer, if you're running a buffer, and then like a fuzz face or a Big Muff or something like that. Not as much with the Big Muff as the fuzz face or tone bender style, but there's still a change. And when you run it afterwards, you're going to notice a change as well. So what I've been doing since I run other pedals that are buffered is I'll just use an EQ pedal afterwards to do two different things. So the first thing is, if you want your fuzz to sound exactly like it does without a buffer, then what I like to do is use a little bit of EQ afterwards in order to sort of tailor the sound. So let me do a quick example of the differences with a buffer and without a buffer. First of all, we'll do it on the Big Muff. Now that's with the buffer, without it, and I'll kick this on and off for a second so you can see the difference. You'll notice less highs basically, and a little bit more mids. So let's change the EQ a bit. All right, so that's the change I'm doing. Basically cutting 6.5K or so, but pretty high presence, pretty high treble rather. Bumping up just a smidge around 800 and just a slight little hair at 1.6K. And it's just a very slight thing. In fact, with these like center detents is what they call them on these pots, it's actually a little difficult with the GE7. And let's do another thing with the Big Muff that I like to do, which is traditionally, on a lot of fuzzes really, it's hard to cut through whenever you're playing with a band. You kick on your fuzz pedal and it seems like you just kind of disappear. Everything kind of becomes muddy. So I generally set up a tone for, depending on what I'm wanting, of course. If I'm the only guitar player and it's the only fuzz and there's not a lot of bass and etc., then this does change. But if I do need to cut through and I'm using a fuzz, I'm really going to drop a bit of bass. I'm going to add some mids, and again, I might cut out some treble if I need it, but I find that when I'm boosting up the mids, it's sort of covering up what you get whenever you're using a buffer. So sometimes you don't really have to do that much to the treble whenever you're boosting the mids with a fuzz. And again, I'm going into the fuzz pedal. I'm going into, this is just a general true bypass box that I've had for years. So it's just a true bypass box. And then from the fuzz, I'm going into the EQ pedal. So rather than running it in front of it, I'm running it behind it to shape the sound of the EQ more. Okay, so I have my EQ set up with how I would normally use it whenever I want to cut through. And as you can see, it's basically, I'm cutting 100. 200, I'm not really changing. 400, 800, I'm boosting up a bit. 1.6, I'm boosting up a bit. And I'm just barely moved just a slight little bit on 6.4K. I did compensate a little bit with the level because when you're boosting those frequencies, it can get louder. I'm just dropping that level a little bit to compensate. When you see this light on, that means that we're running through the boss pedal. When it's off, it means that we're just bypassing everything. Now let's do the same thing with the fuzz face. Okay, so I have just a stock fuzz face here, running guitar into fuzz face, and then I'm going into the EQ pedal afterwards. I am using this true bypass box still, so when I click that on, it's running through the boss pedal. When I click it off, it's just running straight to the amp. So let's see what a buffer actually sounds like after a fuzz on the fuzz face. First of all, without a buffer. So as you can tell, it's a lot more fizzy. So in that instance, we're going to just work on the treble. Again, we're going to work on 6.5K, 6K, 7K, somewhere near there, and boost a little bit of those mids as well. Here's what I've settled on. I'm cutting 6.4K, cutting 3.2K just a smidge, and I'm boosting up 800 and 1.6K just ever so slightly. With the sound off again. With it on, so the buffer is on, the EQ pedal is on. All right, and then again, the same thing I would do with the Big Muff. I want to cut through because the Big Muff, while it's not as bass heavy and flat, I guess it doesn't have the same amount of flat mids as the Big Muff. It still is fairly, for lack of a better word, it just doesn't cut through. So I don't really know what that better word would be, but it doesn't cut through nearly as well as what you can get whenever you start messing with EQ after it. So let's screw with that. All right, so here's what I've settled on with using the fuzz face and the EQ afterwards, cutting through. I've dropped 100 hertz just a little bit, just slightly. Boosted 400 a little bit. 800 and 800 is boosted quite a bit actually. 1.6K, again, just ever so slightly. I did drop 6.4K just a bit and then compensated with the level because by that point, I was boosting so many frequencies, I was much louder. So I just moved the level down to compensate and make sure I was the same level with it on or off. So right now we're off. Here's the sound. You may also notice that whenever I am using the EQ to sort of cut through, that it doesn't sound as good. Well, it may not sound as good to you whenever you're alone in your room just playing the guitar and amp. So the whole idea here is not really for that. It's really about fitting in the context of the band. Whenever you already have a bass drum that's really low, you have a bass player that's playing the bass frequencies, you know, you have cymbals and voices and everything else that's covering the higher frequencies. It's really finding that place to fit in. So that's why I'm really boosting those mids right around 800, 1K or so. Hope this helps you. This is just a little trick that I like to use. So thanks for watching. See you next video. Make sure you leave a comment below what tricks you like to use when you're using a fuzz. I use tricks probably wrong there. Not really tricks, but things you like to use whenever you're using fuzz. And see you next video.